Recovery and hybrid athlete, the two biggest buzzwords in fitness right now. So here I am, a self-proclaimed hybrid athlete, to talk through the 6 things that I like to do to boost my recovery so that perhaps you can boost yours. Bluntly speaking, there are no real recovery hacks, but there are a lot of 0.1% grains of sand at the top of the pyramid that I think get too much emphasis in the modern world. Those things only really apply to those looking to optimize at the very, very top of their game in a professional athletic setting, or I don't know, a billionaire chief exec setting. For the 99.9% of us where we're not in that situation, we should be focusing on the pyramid beneath the grains of sand rather than the grains of sand at the top. So the first and most important thing to consider when looking to boost your recovery is sleep. How much are you getting and what's the quality of it like? First things first, to frame this, we are looking to optimize the suboptimal. And I think that's important because trying to strive for perfection or existing like Brian Johnson does and trying to mimic his routine because you saw it on the internet might not be the best thing for you to do in your individual set of circumstances. Circadian rhythm underpins our general biology on a day-to-day basis in terms of light and darkness and sleep and wake times, and I think one of the best things that we can do to underpin our recovery and therefore sleep quality and amount is have consistent sleep and wake times. For those of us that can, as consistent sleep and waking time as possible will really help with that rhythm and day-to-day biology that will just keep us moving forwards consistently, predictably, so that there's less fluctuation. One of the best ways that I found to actually drill this habitually is to make sure to sleep with the phone outside of the room. If I'm ever in a hotel and my phone's by my bed, there's just that immediate bit of distraction and technology which kind of disrupts that sleep and wake cycle. So one of the biggest things habitually that I recommend is having your phone outside of the room as often as you can. Whilst a lot of this video is encouraging you to focus on things within your control rather than looking to purchase things to improve your recovery, there are definitely ways that you can invest into a improved quality of sleep. Things like blackout blinds, those sunlight morning lamps, improved pillows, I don't know, higher thread count bed sheets. This is kind of where my knowledge of sleep optimization runs out, but it would be silly of me not to acknowledge in the Hubermanization of the modern world that there are definitely things you can invest in that will improve your quality of sleep. As that is the foundation of the pyramid, then I believe that is a good place to invest your money if that is where you choose to do so. The bottom line is that you simply cannot infrared sauna, compression boot, ice bath your way out of being underslept, as it is the foundation that underpins all recovery in an athletic or cognitive setting. So unless you're truly, honestly, absolutely nailing your sleep and having all of the things within your control dialed up to 100, then a lot of the more potentially gimmicky grains of sand at the top of this pyramid need not apply just yet. The second thing when looking to boost your recovery is your training volume, because as you can't ice bath or sauna your way out of being underslept, you cannot ice bath or sauna your way out of being overtrained. Training is one of the most effective ways that we can manage stress and feel like we've had a quick win on a daily basis. But it is another stressor in amongst lots of other stressors. If you've got family, if you've got social commitments, if you've got work commitments, those are all stressors on us as an individual. And training is just another one of those. Whilst it is a controlled stressor and a predictable stressor, it is a stressor nonetheless. Therefore, we can't just keep piling stress on top of stress because our body will give out at some point, especially if we are not sleeping enough. But the most effective way to recover from your training is by not doing too much in the first place. Less can sometimes be more when it comes to making progress with your training, because simply doing more training doesn't directly correlate to more adaptation. There is only a certain rate at which we can adapt, and what we're looking to do is find the minimum amount of training to achieve that maximum adaptation and then strip out anything else, because all that's going to do is contribute to additional fatigue. So be sensible with your training, be specific with your training, and be conservative with your training in the sense that more is not always better. And again, we should be looking to inbuild recovery into our programming so that we don't need to have to look for fast-acting solutions so that we can recover from just having done too much in the first place. If you're looking for any guidance with your training, then head to Omnia Performance in the link in the description down below. It's also on my head, and we have a whole load of hybrid training plans that you can choose from there as well. My approach to recovery places a huge amount of emphasis on control and decision making, and I like to tie together and track all of that control and decision making through this little device right here on my wrist 24/7, sending data to my phone, which I can then reflect on and use to make informed decisions as to what to do next. So whether it's on strain data, recovery data, or sleep data, the main thing that I use this for is just seeing how much sleep I'm getting and tracking patterns over time. The journal feature helps me spot what trends are going to influence quality of sleep, when my last serving of caffeine was, Am I sleeping in the same bed as usual? Is there any travel considerations? Did I eat later than usual? Even things like, is there a dog sleeping in the room with me, which does have an impact on my sleep, by the way. A lot of people may open Whoop and see red recovery score. Oh no. Anyway.
Oh no. Anyway, last week.
And if that's how you interact with it, then it may well not be for you. But if you're looking to make informed decisions as to how to impact your recovery, then Whoop may well be for you. And you can try it for 30 days and get your first month free with the link in the description down below. And you are supporting the channel in doing so. And key detail, because you can charge it on your wrist, it never needs to leave, which means 24/7 lifestyle data, which means 24/7 informed decisions. The third thing to consider when looking to boost your recovery is another basic one, and that is nutrition. And we'll put brackets hydration in here as well, because we all know the importance of nutrition. We all know how much of an impact our diet can have on our cognitive ability, our performance, our body composition, all of these things. But when life gets busy, when things get chaotic, when we're really trying to focus on certain performance here or there, it's easy for things to slip up. And I think what can often happen when we slip up is momentum can build and it can be a bit harder to bring things back. So what I always recommend is having some core principles that underpin our approach to nutrition. So for me, understanding my daily calorie intake and my macronutrient intake in terms of how that's split up is really important. And then from a micronutrition point of view, with my general health and well-being, I make sure to just have some fruits and vegetables with pretty much every meal where possible. But when traveling, when there's not much left in the fridge and I get home late from work, whatever it may be, I don't punish myself if I don't tick every single box along the way, because I know I'll be able to make it up within the next meal, 12-hour period, 24-hour period, day and a half, whatever it might be, because circumstances will flow, and what's important is that we learn to flow with them. Otherwise, if we're looking for perfection within an imperfect world, we're always setting ourselves up for some sort of failure or self-punishment, which in my experience doesn't help. You may well have heard of the sort of 80-20 rule when it comes to nutrition, which is that 80% of your food should be clean, whatever the hell that means in the modern world, but should be nutritionally dense, whole foods focused, etc. And 20% can be enjoyable, a little bit more flexible. Obviously, these are kind of arbitrary numbers, but I think it's something to bear in mind that you should have foundations that are rock solid. And then when you need to be a bit more flexible because of a social setting, a work setting, travel, whatever it may be, you shouldn't then punish yourself if you need to dip into that 20%. But I think what really helps underpin recovery is having a plan nutritionally, knowing what parameters you're looking to work within, understanding how they support your primary goals, and being as diligent as you can with controlling those inputs so that it can best support your recovery. Brackets hydration. I'm not going to sit here and stay hydrated, kids, because you may well think you've clicked on your mum's YouTube channel, which I hope isn't the case, otherwise you're just as surprised as I am. If you're in a training cycle that's endurance dominant, if you're in a humid environment, if you're in a hot environment, you definitely want to keep an eye on your electrolyte balance as well. If you are doing a lot of training indoors, then definitely want to keep an eye on that in terms of your sweat output and things like that. For the most part, just focusing on having sensible structures around staying hydrated is a great place to start. We don't all need to have X thousand milligrams of electrolytes per day on the hour, every hour, as some optimization camps might be suggesting that we do. But I don't want to insult your intelligence. Focusing on quality nutrition, knowing that you're eating the right amount and the right qualities to support your goals, and making sure that your hydration is focused on as well, I think is something that we should really keep in mind, and always assess and audit before we go looking online for a spiky mat to roll our back out on, or before we think, you know what, I need to go to the gym to get my legs and some compression boots because I'm feeling a little bit under recovered. Nail the basics first and foremost, and then the 0.1%ers can come later on. The fourth thing to consider is caffeine management, because don't get me wrong, I enjoy caffeine. Cracking a can of White Monster gives me joy, black coffee gives me joy, but I am quite diligent in what my parameters around sensible caffeine usage are. And for me personally, 3 servings per day, I'm viewing a serving as up to 200 milligrams a time, and I will not have any caffeine after midday. I have a firm midday cutoff, and that is a rule that I often forget in social situations other people don't adhere to. So when they offer me a cup of coffee or energy drink in the afternoon and I scowl at them, they don't get the joke, which is often uncomfortable and honestly something I should really work on from a social point of view. But I'm a huge fan of a caffeine curfew because, again, it fits within the context of circadian rhythm that we were referring to earlier. So when you wake up, adenosine will build, and if you have caffeine, it basically acts as a blocker to adenosine. As adenosine builds throughout the day, your sensation of sleepiness increases. So what caffeine does is it prevents adenosine from building, which delays our sensation of sleepiness. So if you are having that later on in the evening and you're delaying that sensation of sleepiness, then you might struggle to get to sleep. And whilst you might say, Fergus, I am European, I have a double espresso after every meal before I go to bed and have done for years, and I'm fine. That may well be the case. You may well sleep okay, but your brain is going to be experiencing the physiological effects of caffeine through the night, which means that you're likely going to be a little bit more active up here than you would be without the caffeine in your system. So it's going to affect your quality of sleep. And if that compounds over time, that might have an effect on your recovery. We're kind of going down the hierarchy here in terms of priorities, but anyone that watches fitness YouTube normally has a proclivity for caffeine. I am one of those people. So what I would suggest is be mindful of your intake, utilize it strategically, but don't rely on it. If you find yourself crashing in the afternoon and reaching for a coffee, that's a cycle I'd encourage you to break. I'm conscious that it's a very easy cycle to get into where you can become quite reliant and a little bit like, oh, I don't really want to do anything today until I've had that first black coffee of the day, and that's something that we should avoid. So for me, 3 servings a day, midday cutoff. So I'd encourage you to reflect on your caffeine intake, how you utilize it, when you utilize it, but as a blanket rule, I'd say if you are training in the evening, avoid slamming pre-workouts after work for evening lifting sessions because they will affect your sleep. So if you're sitting there in a stringer vest like this at the moment, then sorry. Number 5 is rest days are super cool now. Didn't you hear? I know that's very anti-Goggins of me, but I am quite anti-Goggins on a few things, but that is a conversation for another time. The whole no days off thing is so circa 2012 Instagram when it was just photos and much, much simpler, and Modern Warfare 2 is all I really cared about. But rest days are important. Generally speaking, with my training, I'm training up to 30 hours a week at points, and I will always try and allocate at least one full rest day where possible. Recently, that's been a little bit more challenging because I'm trying to juggle quite a few things ahead of what I've got coming up the second half of this year, but I will always try and build in rest into any sensible training program, cognitively and physically. I think decompression is important mentally and physically, and I do think that the dogma of I have to be doing something every day, otherwise I'm a bad person, can create a bit of a negative loop. And as somebody who's very driven, hardworking, ambitious, you may be the same. Avoiding that sort of dogma, I think, can actually be a really positive thing to do because it gives us the skill and ability to know when to put our foot to the floor and when to sort of ease off a little bit, because you might have a beautifully crafted, naturally aspirated V12 engine, but if you've got your foot to the floor and you're sitting at 9,500 revs for a long time, there's not many V12s that can do that, but those that can sound fantastic, the engine's going to give up at one point. And that's you, you're the car in this analogy. Poorly delivered because I got distracted thinking about loud noises, but hopefully I've made my point clear. The 6th and final point is one that is becoming more and more relevant in my day-to-day life, and the last video that I did on alcohol was a couple of years ago now, and actually my interaction with it has changed. For a long time, my interaction with alcohol has been absolutely minimized because of its effect on my recovery, my sleep, my performance, my cognitive ability, and just general desire to do things. But stag do's, big rugby games, weddings, stuff like that, I've always generally bought in. But recently, things have been quite stressful. There's been a lot going on, huge amounts behind the scenes, training volume's been high, and it's been difficult for me to justify even the slightest bit of a hangover. So I have been avoiding booze. I'm actually, let me check, 63 days without a single sip of alcohol, having attended a wedding and a stag do in that period of time. So I am feeling great for it. Doesn't mean that I'll never drink again, but it means that for the time being, in terms of my priorities and looking at the controllables within my recovery, stress and inputs are too high for me to allocate the space to justify a hangover. You may well be completely dogmatic, no booze, it's the worst thing in the world. That's fine. You may well be, I love 12 pints at the weekend with the boys, it's the best social thing for me. That is also fine. But the bottom line is I have been both ends of that spectrum and fluctuate between them because of my allocation of priorities at the time and how I view the controllable elements of recovery. You cannot ice bath your way out of a hangover. While scientifically it will help restore crash dopamine a little bit, yes, you're simply not going to undo the damage done by choices made that has affected recovery. So my view on things is if you make choices that impact your recovery, then it's up to you to sort of manage the consequences of those as they come. If that's reduced training load, if it's more sleep, if it's missing certain things, that's fine. But expecting to be able to nuke your recovery by choice and then do everything as you normally would with optimized recovery is a potentially foolish way to approach things because you're just trying to burn the candle at both ends, and that again is kind of the foot to the floor, 9,500 revs analogy again. For me, I like to keep the fridge stocked with non-alcoholic beers, just so that I've always got something to sort of represent the ceremony of having a drink if I ever feel like I want to, and I found that to be really useful for me. Again, it's part of a broader narrative of just choice with this stuff, which is that depending on what your priorities are, depending on where you are in a training cycle, depending on where you are with job, work projects, whatever it might be, depending on the family commitments you've got on a Sunday, alcohol can have a place if you choose for it to do so, but it will affect your recovery. So therefore there is a trade-off that has to be consciously decided upon, and nobody else can make that decision but you. So those are the 6 things that I like to really be conscious of when it comes to boosting my recovery. And none of them are what I would call the 0.1%ers, the grains of sand at the top of the pyramid, the things that are a bit more trendy and in the optimization camp at the moment. Yes, we can invest in things that are going to help us nail the basics. Yes, there's things that if we are nailing the basics that we can invest in that will have marginal gains, and you may well want to invest in marginal gains. That's completely up to you, of course. But I do think the narrative has shifted to emphasize far too much of the marginal gains rather than looking at the macro level gains that can be made by simple, controllable choices that we make as individuals within our own individual set of circumstances on a day-to-day basis. So that is how I approach recovery as a hybrid athlete, and those are the 6 things that I like to focus on to boost mine. Make sure to drop the video a like as well, hit subscribe down below and ding that little bell so you don't miss any future videos. If there are any basics that you feel that I've missed that you want to emphasize, please drop them in the comments down below as well. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.